Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to CARIMAC, and to our viewers across the globe, we appreciate you joining us. I'm Kimiko Scott, Journalism Program Coordinator here at the school, and we are bringing you an exciting conversation today. Leadership Legacies, CARIMAC Directors Speak, and this series will run consecutively over the next 3 weeks, so look out for more exciting discussion. It's part of CARIMAC's 50th anniversary celebrations that started in October last year and will continue, so lots more exciting activities to take place. So make sure that you keep up with our socials, follow us on Instagram and Facebook to find out what's coming up next. In this edition of Leadership Legacies, CARIMAC Directors Speak, Dr. Canute James, who was director from 2008 to 2012, will be leading a conversation under the theme Journalism, Where Should You Be Tomorrow? Right? So let's digest that a moment. Journalism, Where Should You Be Tomorrow? Leadership Legacies, CARIMAC Directors Speak is going to be a golden opportunity for knowledge transfer. This could be the ultimate question being asked for aspiring journalists, but also for people who are in the field and wondering what's going to happen next in this fast evolving industry. The current director, Dr. Patrick Prendergast, and I were speaking this week about the vast number of students who have learned so much from the 5 people or more, 5 decades of directors that we've had sitting in our offices. And our guests today have also sat at the feet of our lead person who's going to be leading the discussion. So our guests are actually under the tutelage of Dr. James at some point in their academic and even journalism career, because he's that kind of passing knowledge along kind of guy. And today he's going to be speaking with Giovanni Dennis and Jovan Johnson, who are both CARIMAC graduates, of course. Dr. James's journalism career started in Jamaica with the Daily Gleaner. He was also a reporter for the Jamaica Broadcasting Corporation and was the editor of the Jamaica Daily News newspaper. After several years in the United Kingdom, where he was a reporter, producer, and presenter with BBC Radio, and as a reporter with the Financial Times of London newspaper, Dr. James joined the UE teaching staff. He's still a member of staff, a senior lecturer here at CARIMAC. He has served as the president of the Press Association of Jamaica and has received several awards from the association for his work in journalism. Dr. James is also the recipient of the Maria Moores Cabot Prize for Journalism from the Graduate School of Journalism of Columbia University in New York. Thank you, Dr. James, for being here and guiding this conversation. His guests today, Giovanni Dennis, and multi-award-winning broadcast journalist, currently with the RJR Gleaner Group with 14 years experience. Giovanni is a 2-time Press Association of Jamaica Journalist of the Year. I saw him win just a couple months ago in November. He has more than 40 journalism awards locally and regionally for documentary making, news, features, business, health, environment. You see, the list is endless, and also reporting on children's rights and technology. He will be part of CARIMAC's internship orientation in a couple of weeks. So students who are in second year and you have a quiz to do, Giovanni is going to be a guest on Friday, March 28th. Founding member as well, and the first vice president of the CARIMAC Student Society. I thought that was pretty cool. He studied radio production here in the class of 2012 and a 2018 Sheving Scholar. Also joining us today, Jovan Johnson, a Sheving Scholar and senior staff reporter with the Jamaica Gleaner. He has been active in media for more than a decade and primarily covers politics and public governance. He has won numerous local and regional journalism awards in news and business. Jovan won the Journalist of the Year award for Jamaica twice. He has wedding pictures at the entrance of CARIMAC. His wife is also a graduate. They were classmates, Giovanni and Jovan, in 2012. He's a holder as well of an undergraduate degree in media and communication, focusing on broadcast, and as well as 2 master's degrees. As I tell you, the vast knowledge in these chairs in the studio today, it's amazing. He's also a part-time lecturer with the University of Technology, Jamaica, as well as UWI Mona. Let's say welcome to these gentlemen as they bring you a conversation that's enlightening, focusing on a particular topic. Today, we zoom in on this idea of journalism. Where should we be tomorrow? And first up to the podium to get things started, to set the tone for what this conversation is going to be about, let's invite Dr. James.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. My former students, graduates of CARIMAC, good to have you back in CARIMAC. I want to talk today about the need for journalism to stop, think, and to consider the value of going back to the future, going back to the future. Throughout its history, journalism has won all the battles that have confronted it. Journalism is overcoming all of today's challenges. Journalism will defeat all difficulties. But in going forward, journalism will need a flexible and compassionate readjustment and change in emphasis. And I will speak mainly about news journalism in our Caribbean neighborhood. Journalism's importance lies not so much with the journalist, the editor, the publisher, the broadcaster, the advertiser. All these are important to journalism. But the most important element is journalism and the people in it. Journalism is and has always been done and will always be done for and about people. Without people, there can be no journalism. The calling of journalism is not fixed. It is changing and dynamic. It is and has always been adaptable to unfolding political, technological, and economic developments. All of these, over the years, have been challenges. But at the same time, journalism has had to be and must continue to be rooted in its first calling, truth-telling that informs. And this truth-telling is driven by the unchanging aspect of the human disposition, the normal, natural human curiosity, a natural and innate desire to know. What journalism does and has always done and will continue to do is to satisfy this natural desire by people. To understand where journalism is going, where it should be going, what direction it should take, and why it needs to get there, we have to understand where it is. So, where's journalism today? But to appreciate this, we need to go back a bit and understand where journalism is coming from and the route it took to get here. We don't have to go very far back in history to understand the importance of this need for information to satisfy a normal, natural human curiosity. People without information are people who are lost, unable to take rational decisions about lives and livelihood. They become confused. But efforts to suppress the delivery of information to people have always failed. And they will fail inevitably and eventually, even in those places where the delivery of information is today restricted and controlled. Where is journalism coming from, and why is it important for us to know? 2 examples. There were many attempts by the British monarchy in the 17th and 18th centuries to suppress a growing newspaper business. Publishers were hit with fines, machinery was confiscated, licenses were revoked. But in all these cases, publishers and journalists managed to find ways of defying authority. And of course, there were moments of significance that accelerated the growth of journalism, such as John Milton's intervention in his statement to the English Parliament in 1644. Milton said, "Give me the liberty to know, to utter, and to argue freely according to conscience, above all liberties." This is widely held as one of the most eloquent defenses of press freedom, a freedom that forms today's justification for journalism. In looking at the power of journalism to overcome challenges, we find another example in the efforts of England, as it was then, to restrict press freedom in what were then the American colonies. That effort failed with the landmark case in 1735 of New York Governor Cosby's move against publisher Zenger. Zenger's lawyers argued for the defense of the cause of liberty by speaking truth. The jury found Zenger innocent, a development that was supported in 1773 by what became known as the Boston Tea Party. So the press was influential in setting public opinion against the authority of English colonialism. And that led to the unification of the then disunited states, leading to the late 18th century revolution that led to independence. So it is that these monumental developments are reflected in the constitution of the economically and militarily most powerful country, that no law should, as it was put, abridge the freedom of speech or of the press. Isn't it ironic today that in that same country, the occupant of the White House is attempting to reverse some of these fundamentals of the history of the freedom of expression? Before these developments I have referred to, and since then, the technology that delivers journalism has been changing. The revolution created by the printing press, followed by the emergence of radio, then television, followed by the internet, all have allowed the speed of information and disinformation. But the changing technology has not made redundant the need for journalism. These platforms have helped to expand the avenues for informing people about matters that are relevant and important, which is what journalism does. So, where's journalism today? And I'm addressing this matter as a reminder in relation to our Caribbean neighborhood. The rapid changes in communication technology have brought what appears to be challenges to journalism. People are able to obtain information about almost anything from almost anywhere, and to do that with increasing efficiency and speed. And there are many examples of the misuse and abuse of technological platforms that appear to threaten journalism. But what is most important in determining where journalism is today is to see these technological changes and these platforms as vehicles that can deliver content. And to be sure, this content may not be journalism, but like all other content, it must be assessed, checked, verified, and perhaps rejected by journalism. A word of caution. The increasingly influential tool that is artificial intelligence does not deliver journalism. Like other sources, it can deliver raw material that will be treated by the application of the tools of journalism as with raw material from any other source. The technology today cannot overcome that fundamental human desire to want to know, to be informed. People need to know what's going on so they can take correct decisions, as I said, about lives and livelihoods. What does this mean for journalism today and where it's going? If we say journalism today informs, and we leave it there, we perhaps may miss an important consideration in understanding where journalism is going. Traditionally, journalism has been based on telling people what is happening, what has happened, what will happen, and attributing this to he said and she said. News that is delivered in a relevant manner will always be engaging, but news without a connection to people, news that appears distant and unfeeling, is useless. The future of journalism's role in informing people cannot be determined only by the economic power of media houses and their ability to remain successful businesses. That is important because if the media house fails, the opportunities for journalism become more limited. But journalism of tomorrow, starting today, must chart a path that is defined by the ability to connect stories to people. Going forward, journalism that informs must put people first. Journalism's future must be made safe by addressing the social, political, and economic aspects of the lives of people and relate these to the experiences and expectations of people. I suggest that this approach will be reflected inevitably in the strength of the media business. The engagement will lead to increased relevance that will drive readership, listenership, and viewership that will support the economics of commercially competitive media. So in going forward, journalism, as I said, must put people first, front and center. Journalism going forward must be journalism of cause, consequence, that explains and delivers meaning to people. But journalism in going forward must repeatedly ask itself, what does it mean? So why does journalism need to move? What is journalism's objective? Reporting the news, stating the fact, is fundamental to informing people about matters that are important to them. And reporting the fact must remain the basis for delivering information that is relevant and useful. But I suggest that in going forward, journalism must be guided by the structure and approach that has been used in the past, the delivery of journalism of cause and consequence. The facts are accurate, but going forward, journalism must increase its efforts to be more relevant and engaging. How does it do this? Simply by putting people first. It is one thing to deliver official and sadly too often officious statements that are becoming increasingly much of news journalism content, such as we are seeing repeatedly in recent days in several countries in the region, in which national elections, for example, are pending. And while the reports of what he or she said are important, and again, they must be accurate, journalism must ask the question again and again, what does it mean? It is not the journalist who will provide the explanation and the clarity that will deliver meaning. The interpretation of what some new statement, plan, or project means to the people, who are the center and the reason for journalism, is not the final task of the journalist. Such an attempt at this often misunderstood type of reporting, called interpretive journalism, needs to be handled with caution. What this means is a journalist's ability, after obtaining and stating the fact, to be able to obtain from relevant and credible sources some elaboration and explanation. So, a failed attempt to put a rocket into space led to debris falling on the Caribbean. That is what happened. And we had all the details that this was the second attempt that a rocket funded by someone who has limitless funds has fallen back to Earth. So we expect he will try again. But in connecting the dots, in bringing the story home, in delivering journalism of meaning, of cause and consequence, in stating the facts, Caribbean journalism must ask again and again, what does this mean actually and potentially? Falling rockets could go beyond physical damage by debris and could cause potential damage from, perhaps, pollution from chemicals that is not discovered until sometime in the future. So the questions should be asked by Caribbean journalism of the foreign rocketeers, the region's physicists, of the region's diplomats and political leaders, should be asked, how do we mitigate potential damage from other likely failures? Caribbean journalism has the resources and the sources to deliver information of meaning and consequence to Caribbean people. To be clear, the interpretation is not a subjective delivery by journalists, but the journalists making use of credible and attributable sources to deliver the information. Journalism's future in the Caribbean must also provide what people, the reader, the listener, the viewer and surfer say. Without this connection to people, without putting people first, the lack of relevance, growing disengagement, and the increasing cynicism from people that is overtaking journalism today will continue. We are not ignorant of some of the immediate and important challenges of Caribbean media houses. Media are operating in crowded, competitive, and challenging environments. My contention is that this demand of staying alive must be balanced by an effort to engage increasingly, and in some cases to engage totally, with that most important pillar of journalism, the people for whom and to whom journalism is being delivered. And so to conclude, a Caribbean government said recently it is now, in its words, placing greater focus on fisheries and the development of fisheries, and it refers to grants to fisherfolk and the involvement of young people. Fishing is economically important to many thousands of people in the region. But this is not about an official statement of intent. It is about people, the fisherfolk. But nowhere in this report was any reference to any of the people who are expected to be affected by this project. So in this case, journalism needs to put people first and to step out of its ministerial statement, and also to step out of the newsroom and get from the fisherfolk their reaction to and expectations of this plan. The news story starts with and is about the fisherfolk. It is then given support and some context by the official statement. So, what is needed for news journalism to move forward? is a change in emphasis to be more relevant and useful by being informative. By delivering journalism of consequence that provides additional information to journalism's task of engaging and re-engaging an increasingly skeptical audience. Yes, it is more work for the journalist, who is often very pressured by deadlines and often by seemingly unfeeling editors. But if the purpose is to inform, an approach that delivers more complete information satisfies the journalist's first obligation. Journalism of meaning and consequence that meets the profession's most fundamental and unchanging purpose: informing people of cause and consequence. Thank you.
Apply graduate degree in animation, film or journalism at the Caribbean School of Media and Communication at the University of the West Indies, Mona. For more information, visit www.mona.uwi.edu/apply. Oh, okay. Yes. All right. So we are here at the CARIMAC Legacies of Leadership conversation. Dr. Canute James has been sharing with us his musings about journalism. Where should you be tomorrow? And we're having the conversation and seeing the live stream chat, getting a couple comments in, some of the quotations from Dr. James' address being pulled out. One in particular: AI does not deliver journalism. It's only a tool. Journalism, of course, must represent the people, put them first, and there should be a change in emphasis. Dr. James, of course, was our director from 2008 to 2012, and he will continue to carry on this conversation. We say hello to viewers in Trinidad and Tobago who are viewing as well. Hi, Gonzales. And this series is part of CARIMAC's 50th anniversary celebrations under the theme CARIMAC at 50, a legacy of impact, a future of innovation. We invite you to send questions via the live stream on YouTube. You can also send them via WhatsApp to 876-477-4052. That's 876-477-4052. We're going to get into our new section, or next section of the conversation, as we have Giovanni Dennis and Jovan Johnson give their responses and share their thoughts as well, with Giovanni going first. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Scott. Dr. James, as always, very comprehensive, witty, to the point, and deliberate and purposeful. Really appreciated that presentation, and I think you covered all the issues that are concerned with journalism now, in terms of where we're coming from and where we need to go. I don't know how much more I personally can add other than sharing from my perspective how I see some of it. So I agreed largely with what you've said, probably 9.9 out of 10 in terms of what you said. There's one thing I disagreed with firmly, and I will leave that for the end. But in terms of what needs to happen now and where journalism needs to go, there needs to be more embracing of new media. I think currently, and I'm speaking now as someone who is in the newsroom and observing what's happening in many newsrooms in Jamaica, we're not incorporating new media enough. There's an attempt by some organizations. Some organizations do better than others. But certainly from my perspective, I don't think we are incorporating new media enough to stamp or mark as traditional media in the new media space. And that's one of the big challenges right now I'm seeing. So yes, journalism at its core is a discipline of verification. We have the traditional print, whether the Gleaner or the Observer. We have the traditional television, and traditionally it's CVM and TVJ in Jamaica, and then we have a host of radio stations. But we're not only competing with each other as we were in the 90s, for example. We're now competing with Netflix. And the same thing on the BBC and Sky News, they're live streaming on YouTube, for example. Enough of our local media houses aren't doing consistent live streaming of important major events. So yes, stories will go up and they will be placed up afterwards. So I know the Gleaner does something that Jovan anchors Jamaican can know, and there's also the Daily Soap, but these things come after. In terms of live streaming and actual breaking news, an event while it is happening, we don't do that consistently enough on new media. So yes, we may break the news on radio, for example, which is our, bread and butter platform, because that's where our advertisers are largely. And so there's almost like a hesitation to go on YouTube because we're saying, oh, we don't own some of the rights here, and how this will affect our advertising and why do that. So that's something that we still need to work out. And the same is true for how we use TikTok, for how we use Instagram, for how we use platforms like X as well. That's something that needs to be adjusted from my perspective in terms of what I'm seeing in the profession, in the field. Another issue affecting us as well is how we adjust and tailor our stories for new media. So, for example, the algorithm on Instagram or TikTok will say that videos of no more than 90 seconds, 2 minutes will get engagements. Beyond that, you start losing people's attention. So how do we now reformat what we're doing, put something shorter that's engaging as well, suited for the new media? So put perhaps lower thirds and captions on these reports, and then point people to where they can find the longer, more substantial report. That's something that we're not doing effectively. So we do make attempts to do it, but it's not done effectively. And it's something I've observed personally, and it's something that we are grappling with within newsrooms right now. So those are some of because the truth is people have options now, as I've mentioned before, and there's content being created online, and as you rightfully mentioned, that's not always journalism, that will need to be fact-checked. And there's a proliferation of that online. And we have to find a way to sift through all that noise, remove all of what we have in our traditional spaces, because we have to face the facts. People will not wait until 7 p.m. to know what is happening. They will know the moment it happens. The context and that we provide at 7 p.m. now needs to go deeper and to delve deeper and to explain to people what does this mean for them. So instantly, when that Elon Musk's ship disintegrated rocket, and we're seeing what appeared to be almost pyrotechnics coming down in the Caribbean Sea, and there are videos coming from Portland and St. Anne. Everybody is seeing that at 3 o'clock in the day. What am I saying at 7 o'clock in the night when it comes on TVJ? I cannot be saying the same thing. Surely our duty as journalists is to go deeper, because there will be the citizen journalists or everybody who has a smartphone like this one. My smartphone is my notepad. Before we started today, they were saying, do they need to take my phone? But my phone is my notepad. Well, Jovan is more traditional than I am, but it can do it, and I don't use the pen, so I'm also saving the environment by using this. But everybody who is also not trained has a smartphone. No. So they will record that, and that will be up on YouTube, getting views for the vlogger and the person and the influencer on TikTok and Instagram. Surely then, we in traditional media need to have it up on our space to say, this has happened, join us at 7 p.m. for more details. What does this mean for you? And the same details that I mentioned in terms of how it impacts people. Those are the kinds of issues that I think we need to grapple more with. I do have some other thoughts, and the one thought I'll share finally before I allow Jovan to come in, or for Kimiko to direct. The media convergence at the time I was doing journalism here, 2009 to 2012, it really was largely theoretical in our context. By the time I left, and certainly now, it is very much real. So I did my first degree in radio. That was my specialization. To her credit and Dr. James's credit as well, Miss Ellington always said, once you have the basis in radio, it's easy to go anywhere. And again, I can say this as a fact. Jovan also did radio. He now does print and also television to an extent, or what we call digital, because the Gleaner broadcasts on YouTube and other social media. But the journalists know, unlike 20 years ago, unlike even 15 or 10 years ago, you really have to be your own sound man, your lighting man, your camera, your videographer as well. Because my phone, I was just doing an interview this morning and gathering footage for a report I'm working on. I did that by myself. In fact, Kimiko would have mentioned that I was awarded the Journalist of the Year in November last year. I shot all 5 stories that I entered for that competition. There was only one that I had some assistance from other videographers because we had started working on that piece long before I started, taking up the mantle of filming for myself. And I say that to say that's where journalism is going now. You really do have to be able as a journalist to work on pretty much everything from start to scratch and not just write your reports. And also not just to come and present it on primetime news at 7 o'clock, but also to be able to go live for social media or to record something with your phone and film it as well. So you get the B-roll or footage to send for social media. You do a live record, you can do it like this with your phone, or you can set it up on a tripod and you send that in so that can go up on Instagram. Just a quick example, if you'll bear with me. A doctor, the body of a medical doctor was found by the University Hospital of the West Indies, I think last week or less than 2 weeks ago, certainly. And I was the only media there. I had to get out that information immediately because people will not wait until 7 p.m. People will search and find and they will speculate. And so we have to kind of impose the facts in the space before the disinformation, to borrow your word, starts circulating, which is a major problem right now with the proliferation of AI and technologies that can mimic human sounding voice, and even specifically my voice or your voice or Jovan's voice. So these are some of the things that we have to grapple with, and going forward, we really do have to continue to work on solutions for these various issues. But those are my initial comments. Thank you all for bearing with my waffling. I'll now wait and allow Jovan to speak.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you so much, Dr. James. It really is a privilege to be sitting with my schoolmate, classmate, and friend, and my university lecturer and journalism mentor, to be discussing what I consider, in a sort of acute way, journalism futures, anchored in the fundamentals of what journalism is. Because I fundamentally agree that the fundamentals cannot change, and journalism will survive. There was a point you made, Dr. James, about the role of technology and what that has done in terms of the processes of journalism. And that's where a lot of the tension is in terms of how do we do what we do. Because I accept what you're saying in terms of the people first. We are looking at what causes this, what is the consequence, what does this mean for people? Because ultimately we are trying to help people make decisions, be informed, which is why it's important for the facts to be established, right, for the truth to always rise to the surface. And when people talk about traditional media and new media, journalism is journalism across whatever platform, whatever medium, whatever it is, because you're involved in a process of verification and you're using the medium, whatever that is, to disseminate the information. Admittedly, that's where we find some of the problems. So when Giovanni, for example, mentioned the theoretical nature of how we were taught media convergence, I think because of my internship when I was at CARIMAC in 2011, it did not stay very theoretical for me. I did my internship at the Gleaner newspaper, where I now work. And that is a decidedly converged environment. When I went there, the journalists who were preparing publications or stories for the physical paper were working for online, producing content for online. We're involved in producing radio news content as well. And we're also involved in producing quote-unquote television, news reporting and production. That's a converged environment. Mm-hmm. Gleaner had what was called an online editor. I was pooling together. Now it has changed to what they call an integration editor. So that really anchored it for me, and I quite understand Giovanni's part. When that particular internship brought to me the realities of the evolving nature of journalism, and that we have to contend with the processes and the platforms through which we do work, and how we get to audience. And so I want to use that to sort of highlight two things that I think came out from you, Dr. James. And Giovanni touched on it in terms of the limitations in how we are practicing journalism in Jamaica and perhaps even in the Caribbean in 2025. And I think it's tied to two things. What I would call upskilling, retooling of sorts. And it's real for me as an investigative journalist how I have to access data sets that are produced by government agencies, that are produced by entities or non-governmental organizations, wherever from across the world. And then I have to pour through that data set to find patterns and interesting things that I believe are in the public interest, that my audience would like to know, and make that relevant to them. Now, you need skills to do that. You need research, not just merely research skills. In fact, I was looking at, I think it was New York Times or how they've set up their newsroom and so on. And they have a data engineer. They have, and not just them, but you have research, what they call research journalists. I know some people may say whatever that is. But I think that's a nod to the kind of upskilling and retooling that we need to be and we need to reach in order to bring out the information to people that we think is relevant. And in an interesting way, data journalists, data scientists are being employed by media houses as a nod to generating content, but also disseminating the content in ways that are interesting to people. And I think that is where I agree with Giovanni, that we have to get on to more. And there are structural issues in how we get on to that, because you're talking about hiring highly qualified and hiring in a non-traditional way that the newsrooms have to engage with. You can't just sit and think about, oh, you're going to hire an editor and a reporter. The question is, what kind of editor are you going to hire? What kind of a reporter are you going to hire? Reporters who are able not the best word here, but manipulate the machinery and the technology to get the content and to serve people. And this is a fundamental thing for journalism futures and for where you should be tomorrow. The kinds of skills that you have, and then when you tie the need to upskill and to retool in order to function and to engage with the newer technologies, you're also looking at the segmented audiences. Yeah. And so media houses, journalists, journalism schools, whatever, all of us who are involved in the practice of journalism have to recognize that our audiences are now far more segmented. And because they're far more segmented, the demands are different. And so media houses, journalists, journalism, all of us, we have to find a way to get to deeper audience engagement. Who are we really serving? So Giovanni talked about traditional media in Jamaica and how you have to ensure that this is done on this particular platform because you're serving your advertisers, and that goes to the issue of the business model of journalism. But that's also changing. And the media bosses, the journalists, the teachers, the schools, and so we have to confront these issues and to an extent adapt to them. And it's going to be tough at first because the persons who are practicing for years are going to feel as though they're being shunted aside, they're being pushed out. And it's not necessarily the case, I think. It's a fact that there are greater demands here. The fundamentals, the principles of journalism remain, but the question is the process and the dissemination of that content is different, or those are different. And you have to have the kind of capabilities, or journalists with the capabilities, and newsrooms with, not just brick and mortar newsrooms anymore. We're talking about digital newsrooms, the spaces, because newsroom is a space, and that space you can conceptualize anywhere, not just in a brick and mortar place. And so we have to get into understanding our audiences, where they are, who make up that audience, because you'll have, and as a result, you'll have newsrooms that will have content tailored for different kinds of platforms because of who your audience is. And if you think about the monetary side, you have to know this in order to target your advertisers and you know, to get your funding and so on. And those are absolutely critical. Which brings me to the final point I made before I yield back. What they call, it's still problematic and questionable, but you have to acknowledge it, entrepreneurial journalism. So in the sense that, you know, what young people call nowadays is content creators. And in fact, some people are not even saying they're journalists anymore, they're content creators. I am saying I'm a journalist because there's a fundamental difference in how we operate. But nonetheless, though the idea of content creation, content generation, and how we serve the audiences requires, it's almost as if it requires, and that's why I'm saying there's a problem there. It requires a journalist to have to contemplate how will this benefit the newsroom in a more economic sense. Yeah. And I know that's a problem because we're taught and we grew up in a culture, not just Jamaica, but we grew up in a culture where the newsroom is a sacred space. We do not contemplate advertising issues, marketing issues, because then you begin to have a greater collision of interests. But the technology and how all of the ecosystem for journalism is operating and structured now is that you have to engage with it. And the question is, where do you draw the line? I don't necessarily know where to draw the line. I know that I'm going to do my work regardless of any interference. And then I want to be in a space where I'm not being told what to do. But because of the audience segmentation, the demands that are being made on journalists and so on, you now have to begin to see how you can, how you'll produce this. And so as a result, you end up with a lot of journalists now engaging in podcasting. I remember Faye Ellington telling us she had podcasts and she would deliver media production. We had a course called media production as podcasts. And now that's a huge journalism, entrepreneurial effort. Newsletters. And then you have to consider the whole issue. And when we talk about the funding, if in Jamaica, as we are struggling now, and I'm with the RG Agrina Communications Group, and we're struggling, and so are others struggling, and you're wondering how are you going to generate the funding and to keep journalism alive and so on. And you have to consider non-profits, you have to consider all of these, crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, whatever it is, because the traditional formats are changing. Businesses that would traditionally advertise with traditional media are now having their own so-called media arms, and they're getting their audiences. So hence the difficulties that we face. So those are some issues that I think we have to grapple with as part of where you should be tomorrow.
I'd like to ask Dr. James to engage in a bit of conversation or response, because I mean, you raise the topic. These gentlemen are bringing their perspectives to us as we continue the conversation here at CARIMAC. It's Leadership Legacies. CARIMAC Directors Speaks. And I think one of the points that really stood out to me from both gentlemen, and maybe you can comment, Dr. James, is the need for new media inclusion, and that idea of including different platforms within the consideration of our journalism, even when compiling a story.
There's one thing Jovan said and hinted at, which was the one thing I disagreed with when you mentioned. Jovan spoke about him looking at the New York Times newsroom, for example, and having a person who sifts through the data, or a research journalist solely. And close to the end, when you were speaking, you said CARIMAC journalists have the sources and the resources to tackle some of these stories. I disagree that way. Do we have the resources really in practicality? And that's the one thing I say I think we are struggling with, because we work for the largest media organization in the English-speaking Caribbean. We struggle and sometimes don't get the resources that we need to pursue some of our stories. Some of the documentaries I do, for example, I'm literally the only person working on it. When I look at my colleagues overseas, they have an entire team behind them. People just booking and sorting out the food, a light person, a camera person, 2 or 3 videographers and stuff like that. I'm just using my mobile device. So that's something that we struggle with, the resources, and that was the only thing that I didn't fully agree with you overall on, in terms of having the resources that we need to effectively do some of the enterprising journalism that you, and as a viewer and an audience member as well, want to see, and that our viewers deserve. We don't necessarily have the resources to properly follow through on the stories. I mean, at a very basic level, yes, we do. We'll get the vehicle to go out, and we'll often get a videographer when necessary. But to go that much deeper, Jovan is enterprising. Jovan understands that of things. Not all journalists will know how to sift through a data set, for example, and to scrub the internet to find the patterns. Because that person doesn't have that skill set, is it a case where they shouldn't be able to do that story? No, I do believe newsrooms need to evolve to a point where we do have people who specifically are trained to sift through data. So they do have, for example, a librarian who is very useful, and because we're now one company, RJ or Gleaner, I have access to that librarian. I don't necessarily have an equally competent librarian on the TV end to get things as quickly as I would want to, the way I can from his librarian. So those are some of the challenges I want to say. And to just make the point, we do have librarians also at TVJ, but in terms of the quickness that I'm able to access stuff at the Gleaner. So that's the one thing I wanted to say. I didn't fully agree with when you mentioned in terms of having the resources. But yes, Ms. Scott had said that, she wanted you to.
But the point you made about the work you do would indicate to me that the resources are there. So we're thinking at one level of the human resources, the thinking journalist who will decide the structure of the information, what is needed in the information, what is relevant, what is not relevant, how it's to be presented to the reader, the listener, the viewer, and the surfer. The human resources, plus the technological resources for gathering and disseminating information. So it's not really a shortage of resources. Perhaps it's the way in which these resources are being used for the benefit of journalism, and by extension, for the benefit of journalism's most important component, which is the reader, the listener, the viewer, and the surfer. So perhaps the argument and the discussion is about the availability and the use of resources which may not necessarily require huge capital expenditure, but may require further upgrading of journalism skills to make sure that these resources are properly and efficiently used.
But I quite agree with you, and I think a dose of common sense has to also be injected into some of my own colleagues as well. Because I think in the same way that we have the kind of audience differentiation and segmentation now, and people want more personalized things, so it's sort of the Netflix era where I can go onto a news station or a news website and just get exactly what I want about something. I think some of us as journalists also have to know that there's information out there all over the place, and we have to be able to be a little more enterprising and innovative to get out there to get the information. You don't necessarily always now have to go and sit in a library, not the library at our media houses now, but the National Library or wherever. We can create relationships. You can push your editors to create relationships that, as you say, are not necessarily going to require a huge capital outlay, but just thought in how do we establish the kinds of synergies and relationships with the training institutes, with research institutes, whatever, where information is being produced, to be able to access the kind of information.
Yes.
It takes us also just reading more, getting more out there to get the kinds of information that we need. We can't be like our audience who wants us to put the information to them just in the tailor-made way they want it. But we also have to be able to burrow through to get the kind of information that we want. But I do accept that, and I think that sometimes has to do with the leadership of newsrooms. And I'm speaking very generally here. It has to do with the leadership of newsrooms and the ways in which that leadership can inspire. Because the issues that we face in Jamaica as a small economy, let me put it like that, with struggling media business is not unique to Jamaica. It's an issue across the Caribbean, across parts of Asia, across parts of South America, a lot of countries, where even regionally in the United States, because sometimes I think we look and we see the big networks and so on, but even regionally, newspapers are folding, all kinds of struggles that they're facing, and they have to be pivoting towards that. And it takes leadership, and that is very, very important in how we see our journalism futures, and reimagine newsroom and the ways in which we practice journalism, of course, holding to the core and to the important principles.
Yeah.
I think those are important.
The economic business basis of media, very important to be considered in all of this, because without the audience, without the people, it is difficult for media to survive. As with other businesses, they are competitive. There are pressures on the technology that is available, the technology that can be obtained, the skills, the human skills that are needed to usefully use, for example, the platforms to gather and disseminate the information. So we must not forget that media are businesses, except of course those that are specialized ones that are dependent, for example, on government budgets right across the world.
There's something else I want to add to the issue, the very important issue of resources and the access to resources, like you said. Because you're saying it's not necessarily an absence of the resource, but the more so the access to it and the channeling of that resource to where it's most needed and beneficial for journalism at its core. It is a very real problem and a growing problem, and I believe as a society, as a country, and as a region, we really do have to decide how we adjust our model, whether it's our funding and advertising model. Because the reality is this: some of the very best talents in journalism are leaving. Not because they want to leave, but primarily because the salaries aren't enough and the working isn't sufficient, isn't good enough, and the working conditions are also not necessarily good enough. And so what you'll find, and this is something I've observed, and I think a study should be done about this. If you just look at it, any journalist who is of any use, who has good journalistic acumen and has developed experience over a 5 to 10 year period or in excess of that, they reach what you'd perhaps call the top or among the best in the profession, and they leave. They go and they take on a PR job, and they're the manager of communication of one of the entities here. And I do not believe, and again and I'm not just speaking from belief or just from my discussions with people who I know who have done this. When you speak with them, it's not that they love this PR job or writing press releases every month. They love journalism, but journalism does not pay in comparison to this big PR job. Journalism does not love them back, to borrow Jovan's word. Yeah. So that's a very real, and that's a resource issue.
The economic imperative.
Yes. The economic imperative. And so we're in an age now where companies and like the one that we work with and others as well, we are trying to use the same set of journalists and to stretch them to be the videographers. So I use my personal phone to film. I buy my personal equipment, a tripod, a Bluetooth microphone, and what we call a gimbal to steady the shot as well. And I also buy my lighting. But to use Jamaican products, I just become love it to my heart, and I invest my own resources and money to do that. I don't think I should have to. And that's the case where I find myself. I know of other journalists right now who do social media and who don't have a phone to do their job, which is to do the social media that the company needs, which is an imperative. And yet we speak about, the digital first and the move towards digital, because everyone has access to online, and that's where our audience is, the different social media. And we have to tailor and cater to those particular audience. But journalists need the resource to do that, and in some instances, something as basic as a phone, a Bluetooth microphone that can connect to that. And these are things that journalists are in fact struggling with. And again, like Jovan, I'm speaking very generally here. Speaking very generally, but that's a very real issue that we face. The access to the resources, the tools needed to execute the job effectively, and also the salaries. We really have to do better for the journalists them coming into the profession and those who are already there, because people have left, are leaving, and are planning to leave because the salary is just too woeful.
Yeah.
We want to invite your questions as well. Thank you for being here with us. You can put your questions on the live stream. This issue about resources being paid to journalists has come up among students for weeks, months, years since I've been here. The question has come up. But before we get to that, I want to invite our viewers to send us your questions via the live stream chat, but you can also do that via WhatsApp 876-477-4052. And I wanted to give Dr. James a chance to also comment on something that Mr. Johnson said, that journalism is defined perhaps by the approach to gathering and sharing information. Can you just dissect that? I know you mentioned it as well, but can you dissect what that means to you, Dr. James?
Yeah. At its heart, there are some fundamental skills that the journalist must have. The journalist cannot be a passive recipient of information. That would lead to situations where the journalist receives the information and passes it on, hoping that an audience of some sort will find it useful. That there's no treatment of the information, no application of the fundamentals of journalism, no attempt to deal with the jargon to make sure that people understand it, understand what is being said, understand the importance of what is being said. And my argument is that, yes, with the technological changes, and also with the difficulties of resources, the difficulties of remuneration, and so on, there need to be continued consideration of the skills that are needed by journalists to be effective. And to follow up on the point you made, very important point, about the fact that journalists, after a while, tend to leave the profession, and I'm happy that you two are still there.
For now.
For now, yeah. That media managers, despite all their concerns about their resources and advertising revenue and so on, begin to consider the importance of the journalist and what the journalist does, and doing good work, doing quality work, attracting and maintaining an audience adds value to potential advertising revenue. Quality journalism brings in audiences that are brought in also attract advertisers, builds up the commercial side of the business. So again, with changing times, perhaps we need to educate media managers that the times have changed. There's competition for skills that journalists have in other forms of communication, and that they should really start to think positively and meaningfully about how they treat, how they recruit, how they keep, and how they reward this very important calling that is journalism.
I do want to comment on, could you just repeat the quote, you read a specific quote from what Jovan said?
Jovan was saying that journalism is defined by the approach to gathering info and gathering and sharing information.
And I want to comment on it because he's absolutely right. And I read somewhere, and it's something that has stayed with me. At its core, journalism is a discipline of verification. The journalist's job is to go there. So if politician A says the rain is falling, says it's raining, politician B says the sun is shining, my job isn't to say that A says it's raining and B says it's shining. My job is to get up and leave the studio, go outside and look in the sky and see what is happening. And I think that's what Dr. James is getting at. He was also shading us in broadcast media as well. And I picked up on it. I don't think I didn't pick up on it. I think and rightly so. It's a challenge. Do better, because it's possible. And I think in that way, when he's speaking about having the resources to do it, we can, at the very basic level, verify a lot of what we're reporting. And I think enough of that isn't being. And I'll give you a quick and practical example. Last Friday, we covered a story about the Jamaica National Heritage Trust knocking over sand dunes out by Fort Rocky, or near Fort Rocky, along the Palisades Strip, a protected area. The Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation put out a release to say that mangroves were also destroyed. I was hosting Beyond the Headlines that day. I spoke to about 2 separate experts, Professor Mona Webber from here at the University of the West Indies as well, marine biologist with over 25 years experience, and she worked out by that area. She knows the area well. And she was able to say to me, I don't know that mangroves were not done, because mangroves are not at that specific location where it happened. And I kept getting the word, and I said to people, my colleagues said, hey, no mangroves were destroyed. It's really the sand dunes. Let's get that clear. We can't necessarily just run with what the KSAMC said. No, how do we verify whether mangroves were not done or not? You get up and you send a reporter to go there to look. And that's one of the first things I also did. I sent out the production assistant to go out there, because our job is not to say what the KSAMC, which is the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation, said in their release, because there are political undertones that we have to know.
Absolutely.
The head of the KSAMC is from the opposing People's National Party. The government is a JLP government. We have to factor in all these things when we are reporting. And our job is not to just be a conduit, whether it's just information or even disinformation. We can't just be a conduit for that. We have to stop and we check. And there's the 5 W's and the H as well. These are the primary: the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the how. We cannot forget that. And if we don't know any of the 5 W's or the H, we should say that in our reports. It's not that we must always know them, but if we don't know, we should say it. But also, we must make the attempt to verify, and we should demonstrate that to our viewers, that we went and we checked ourselves, and this is what we saw. And I think that's what you are pointing to, wanting to see more of that in journalism. And it's sad that you have to say that, because that should be the basis of what we do, and it's a fundamental part of what we're doing, which brings us back to another point.
But before you get to that, part of the import of that kind of the processes we engage with to verify and so on is particularly critical now in this time of journalism, because of the issue of deep fakes and the very virulent and aggressive forms of misinformation and disinformation, which require journalists to go even deeper to ensure that certain information, or any information you're putting out, but certainly appreciating the different sources, require even greater efforts to verify the information and to ensure that what you're putting out there is tested and conforms with the standards that we know. And that's critical to the issue of credibility. Because in fact, that is what, when people talk about traditional media and so on, and yes, I get the idea of traditional media, that is to say radio, television as they independently existed, one-way communication and so on. But traditional media also implies certain values that the competitors of the so-called new media, I'm not sure if you're new media anymore, because we have been on this wave forever, and we keep talking about new media, but the different forms of media now that are much more popular and are sources of competition. But what we tend to have over them, who are traditional journalists, if you will, are the standards to which we adhere, the issues of verification, truth, fact, all of these things that are critical, even in the quest, even in the effort to be first, and this competition to put out the news. It's expected that we would take certain steps as well. And I think that aspect of journalism process is critical to ensuring that our output separates itself by virtue of the quality and the what it inures to credibility.
And it takes us back to Dr. James's point that journalism will never die, will always survive what's happening, because you see it, and I'm agreeing with you, Jovan, you see it especially in times of national disasters, hurricanes especially, or earthquake. What people do a lot of the times with the same, not even just deep fake, but they pull back footage from a previous disaster and they put it out now for, again, this desperate need to be first and for likes and for clicks and the form of food of themselves online. It's in these moments that even the same people who will say, oh, they're getting the content on social media, they're coming to the traditional media platforms and even the traditional media platforms on social media to verify what's happening, because some of these things won't be true until we see it on TVJ or until we see it on the Gleaner.
They fall back to traditional media.
They always fall back to traditional media
So-called traditional media.
in times of national disasters, because the people are aware and they know of the misinformation and disinformation taking place, and people deliberately misleading them. It is that trust and that credibility, because we follow the precepts of journalism and we go through the rigor of verifying what the accuracy of what we put out. It is that primarily why people always come back to us, regardless of the new media. And this is not to put down new media, because there are people within social media spaces and alternative media too, because I know you're annoyance at new media, alternative media. There are people that are doing good work. Yeah. And this is not to put them down at all. There are people doing solid journalism there and content creation then, even if we don't want to use the word journalism. But what we consistently have is that credibility, that the people know that once we put out something 9 out of 10 times or 9.9 out of 10 times, it is always accurate, especially.
You say people know, but I am wondering
disaster.
if they do. Do we need to educate the populace about the values of journalism yet again? Because is it that the people who are viewing, the generations that are looking at alternative media, are they aware of the difference in standard that journalism will hold? Are they aware of the verification checks that journalism partakes in?
It tends to come up in a lot of ways, in sort of in the rear end of things.
Yes.
So whenever we get it wrong, I say, but if they get it wrong, then what is there to defend us or to protect us if they are getting it wrong? So at the moment when we get it wrong is when that comment comes. But more to your point, I don't think it's self-evident anymore that traditional media carries I think it is an implication, yes, but carries these kinds of values that people just automatically assume. I think because of the flux that we're in, we have to constantly, actively, no longer as passively, actively demonstrate that we provide credible information that is according to established standards and checked, if you will. And this is something that has to be constantly demonstrated, and it has to be constantly demonstrated because, and I know Dr. James spoke about the 1700s and what the British monarchs did and how they tried to suppress information. And in a large way, we're still having that. And not just, and you cited the example, Dr. James, of the United States, but almost in any country, really, that supposedly says that they're a liberal society with supposedly strong democratic institutions, of which a free press is vital. Yeah. But that you have these social and political pressures where there is a deliberate, okay, so let's accept that there is a greater level of distrust in established institutions, or the so-called establishment institutions. Not just the media, but the economic institutions, political institutions, all those kinds of things. And for the benefit of politicians, wherever they are, it serves their interest, especially, to generate distrust in traditional media. Why? Because of you're more likely to find efforts at fact-checking, verification, and other kinds of quality assurance when statements are made, when anything is made. Investigations, investigative journalism. So you attack them because you are able to benefit from the general distrust that is taking place in institutions in society now. So it's not self-evident, and we have to be more aggressive and active in how we demonstrate why we are different from the rest in terms of our mainstream.
I think it's important also to remember that people, regardless of the levels of education and exposure and experience and so on, people are smart.
Yes.
They can make a determination about the value of information they're getting and the source of the information. And when journalism consistently delivers information that is landed with a high degree of credibility and trust, my contention is that inevitably it will redound to the benefit of the media house that puts in the effort, that has the structures and the professional approach to make sure that the output is credible, that people come to believe and accept what they are getting, because they may not know the ins and outs of the process of the newsroom, but after a while they come to accept and believe. And perhaps this is why, as you say, in times of stress and uncertainty and so on, people revert to what they know to be the established media and the output of the established media.
And it's also an opportunity for the established media to assert and to show why.
Yeah.
And we always, and I think in large parts we do during those times, but also to say a lot of the content generation and content creation happening within social media, if you check the source of the content, it's often from a story generated by traditional media. So a story Jovan does, for example, will generate interest and discussion online, and a vlogger will speak about it. So somebody watching it on a vlogger platform initially may think that that vlogger originated it, but if you check it, and it's something that I know because I've also watched some of their content from time to time, and they realize that they take our stories, can almost repackage them, use our material, and then almost put it out as their own sometimes. They don't always credit us, which is unfortunate. And they have these massive following, and so people will see the material coming out from them and say, oh, then if I get this, so why I need to go watch TV just or read the Gleaner, not knowing that it is really our content and our material that's been repackaged and put out almost as if it's, you know, belonging to the vlogger or the content creator online.
I want to pivot to a question from our students who are very intrigued by the statement that perhaps resources, you get to a certain level in the journalism space, and you may not be financially able. So I will ask it in a way, well, let me ask it like this. You're a journalist. Do you see yourself being able to buy a Kingston house within the next 5 years? And if not on your journalist salary, what other things are you going to be doing in order to afford?
Let me answer the question this way. You don't see a prime minister, for example, moonlighting as a DJ on the side.
Right.
You don't see a prime minister moonlighting as a public transport operator on the side. Or you get the drift of where I'm going. What you oftentimes find happening, and Jovan mentioned it, well, you mentioned it when you were reading his bio. He was also a part-time lecturer here, also a part-time lecturer at another university.
Yes.
And just ask yourself, why is that the case? Why is one of the best investigative journalists in Jamaica, certainly the most preeminent newspaper journalist in the last 5, 6, 7 years in Jamaica, working 3, 4 jobs? I do side jobs as well. Why do we have? And I don't, is it that we want to necessarily be doing this? So, okay, yes, we may be able to meet our needs and manage our expenses by, juggling 3 or 4 jobs. But why should we have to? I don't see a pilot moonlighting as a taxi operator. So I'm saying there are some professions where when the cream of the crop when they rise to the top, they are properly compensated. When there's a certain level of seniority and experience, whatever it is that you're doing, you're compensated proportionally. The same is not always true for journalism. And again, I'm speaking very generally here. Very generally here.
I think Giovanni taps into a concern I've had with the model of remuneration that we've had in Jamaican journalism. And from speaking with some of my colleagues in the Caribbean, I've noticed it as well. I know Dr. James could perhaps speak even more to that. Is that the tendency in Jamaican journalism practice is you start as a rookie reporter. You go up, you become a reporter, then you become a senior reporter, and if you're lucky, you become an editor. And the better salaries are paid to editors generally, and up to when you become the head of newsroom editors-in-chief or whatever you call it. Why should it have to be so? Yeah. Why should it have to be so? If you and so sometimes what you end up having is a misalignment of resources and inefficiencies, because in other words, an excellent reporter, and I'm not saying I am one, an excellent reporter.
No, Giovanni said it for you.
An excellent reporter is not necessarily a great editor.
Yep.
But because of the model we have in Jamaica and in parts of the Caribbean, that reporter is forced to accept, is forced to move up and get this because they need to earn more.
Yep.
Why can't the reporter be paid more than the editor?
Yep. There are a few examples that I know of. When I say a few, maybe about 4 or 5, in the Caribbean, where the Peter Principle has afflicted
the newsroom.
Very good reporters.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And they are moved up, but they have no taste for, no skills in administration, in people management, and so on.
And those require specific and separate skills.
Precisely.
Too. And it's not that those skills can't be taught.
Yeah.
But again, the model isn't properly, there's a misalignment of the result. I agree.
And the other problem, of course, is within the structure of media houses, that people with equivalent experience, perhaps in terms of the years of service and so on, in the overtly commercial sections of the media house are better paid than those in the newsroom.
Yeah.
So for newspapers, people in charge of circulation and advertising are generally paid much more than the people in charge of the editorial departments.
It's a huge problem.
And
just sorry, Giovanni, and for the journalism futures, that has to be something, certainly for us in the Caribbean, we have to sort through, because you're going to have a misalignment of resources, you're going to end up with inefficiencies, you're going to lose quality reporting because you have a quality reporter has had to take a job that they're not necessarily interested in and do not have the kind of passion and talents to deliver a good job as an editor. And then you lose that good reporter who has good depth of sources, who is a ground reporter, who is enterprising, who brings a kind of value to you. So when you take that reporter who offers you all of those kinds of value and added value and put them, you create a huge hole that hiring a new reporter will not fill.
You lose a good reporter and you gain a poor manager.
You gain a poor manager. So they're paying, they shouldn't be, we can't pay an editor more, we can't pay a reporter more than the editor, because you're not looking at value and what you need.
And I think these are conversations like this one is important to have, because these are very real issues now afflicting, I should say, our profession.
Yeah.
And for the future of it, these are issues that have to be addressed.
I see you guys as being advocates for the future generation because you're having the conversation now. So let me ask the next part of the question. How do you keep passionate? Giovanni, I know when you won the award last year, you said you were on the verge of heading out of journalism, just on the cusp. So how do you keep the passion, and what is keeping you in that space of creating journalistic content?
Passion.
And it's something you're born with. I think I was born with it. I'm naturally curious, and I like to see things done properly or things done right. I mean, it's good to say, being a voice for the voiceless and speaking truth to power. I'm just looking out and seeing something, and I'm saying that seems wrong to me, and I'm going to do some research on that one thing and to explore whether it's wrong and why it may be wrong, and get different experts to speak about it, and then I'll find a way to synthesize it all, create a proper composite, and put out a report. How do I keep that passion? I'm also a student of the profession. Like, I'm not too big to listen to guidance. Dr. James will tell you. Faye Ellington, who you mentioned, who is on the stream, will tell you. They call me consistently or send a message consistently. If I mispronounce a word, when I do something good, they will say to me, well done. If something could have been better, they will say to me, you could have done that a little differently. Oh, this is how this word is pronounced. You have to know better. And we need that. I'm never too big for that, and I love and welcome it from them. And I think we need to have more lecturers, professors like Dr. James, like Faye Ellington, who don't leave the students after they've gone into the profession. And we also need more people within the profession to listen. Because you have the platform, or because you're the person of the moment, in the spotlight, doing the work, yet you don't know it all. You never know it all. It really is a lifelong process, and I think that's what keeps me grounded. My approach to journalism, I'm always wanting to learn something new, and also the stories affecting people, the issues affecting people don't change. And if you really love the profession, you'll always see something in an imperfect society that we live in as well. There will always be something to report on, and there are just so many things. I don't have the time to do every single report that I really want to do or that comes to me. I sometimes feel deeply saddened, and I'm not just exaggerating, that I don't get the opportunity to do all the very important stories and ideas and approaches that people make to me with stories that they want me to cover. Because the one that I'm currently on, I want to do it to the best of my ability. It's the very reason why someone would approach me to do a story anyways, because of how I do it. And I don't want to give that up because I want to rush to do more. So that's how I keep grounded and keep the passion.
The passion.
How are you keeping passion?
It can be challenging at times.
Yes.
Let me perhaps start that way. It can be very challenging sometimes. There's a little lady who told us way back when that you practice until you can't get it wrong. And I agree that journalism is a practice. Dr. James told us when we were studying radio that journalism is one of those professions where every day you get up, you have to start over. You have to start over. He doesn't mean that you start from scratch in the sense that you bring the experience you've had with the previous one, but you have to start the story from scratch in that sense. And there are always things to improve, always something to do better after that. And I wake up every day, almost, every day. Inspired because there's something else I thought I should have done, didn't get to do it, and I want to do that. Yes. And I keep finding them, and they come to me sometimes, and I want to be better at it. Yeah. There's something that also drives me, which is it gives me immense satisfaction when I'm able to bring out an issue that has affected a group of people or some person or organization, that when you realize if it weren't through my instrumentality and my efforts, then it perhaps would not have come out. And you see the impact it has had on them, because there's a way in which we sometimes don't find the softer voices that are in the society, the ones who are in the cracks and crevices, as Stuart Hall likes to talk about. And they are sometimes, and they're the ones crying out for us. And we are in a position many times to highlight their issues. And I look forward to that. I have a development background, and I think that is where I get a lot of that from. And that inspires me. Find the stories that are just not.
Journalism is not something that happens to you. It's not something that you meet down the road. It is something that you have to want to do.
The Great final remarks from Dr. James as we get ready to close off this series, or this edition of our series, Leadership Legacies, CARIMAC Directors Speak. It's been led by Dr. Canute James, featuring journalists and exemplar CARIMAC graduates, Giovanni Dennis and Jovan Johnson. Thank you for engaging with us and sending in your questions. Special thanks to our guests, the CARIMAC technical team of Alistair McLaren, Craig Duhaney and Jovan Matthews, as well as our student volunteers who are here in studio, and our current director, Dr. Patrick Prendergast, and all the staff here at CARIMAC that support our productions. Thank you so much. Next week, Dr. Livingston White brings you another engaging conversation in the series. Remember, this is part of CARIMAC's 50th anniversary celebrations under the theme, A Legacy of Impact, a Future of Innovation. Thank you for joining us.